Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed. We are so happy to be here with Bree Johnson. Welcome to Ivy Unleashed.
Thank you. I'm such an avid fan. This is a dream. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. So Bree and I go way back. We have a mutual friend. Shout out Shannon. And Shannon and Bree were in law school together when I was roommates with Shannon. So I got to watch these girls study their asses off and stress out and try and have fun. And they had such a beautiful friendship, and it was really cool to be a part of it. And then over the years, you know how you add friends on Facebook and you follow each other's lives, and all of a sudden I see Bree talking about mindfulness and intentionality and authenticity. I'm like, girl, what you doing? Like, what is happening? And you were an attorney, and now you've taken some turns into this new life, and we're going to talk about it today. I'm really excited to hear because you have a podcast called the Untamed Mind, and it is awesome. And in real time, you're hearing Bree unlearn all of these ways of life. And so first of all, let's talk about the Untamed Mind and your history of going from law school to where you're at, which I know is a lot to unpack, but just talk to us about your journey and what the Untamed Mind means to you.
Great question. So I decided and landed on the name, the Untamed Mind, because I have really embraced this part of me that is stepping into recognizing all the conditioning that I have. So go back 15, 20 years, I was very predictable. I made choices that were very much based in trying to make my parents proud. And I can say that now. I had none of this sensibility then, but it looked like going to undergrad, being even before that, really being the captain of the swim team. That was the one goal I had for myself. And it was just this constant achievement mentality. And it really came back to I'm a product of divorced parents, both of whom remarried. So I had this blended family and really spending time and shifting myself in both of those home environments. And so for really up until about 6 years ago, not having a solid sense of self. And so what I grabbed onto was this achievement. So college, law school, climbing the ladder, becoming a C-suite leader in an AmLaw 200 firm by the time I was 32. And I had every goal along the way, whether it was compensation or titles, I hit it out of the park, which is very satisfying to the ego. And so then what happened was the rug got pulled out from under me from a career perspective, and I had built all of my worth in my work. It was an exceptionally rupturing experience. I was diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, depression. It was a period of many months of feeling like the bottom was falling out. I was falling and having no clear way or path forward. And so that I think we generally have really rupturing experiences, and there's an untaming that happens that way. And it can feel like it's forced on us. And then on the other side of coming through that, I had the ability then and the sensibility and a lot of deep therapy, work on nervous system regulation to say, okay, now that I am of a clearer mind, I've gotten through this. What else do I want to unlearn? What else do I want to untame? I've done everything such a predictable autopilot way. What are my next opportunities to actually, first of all, connect with Bree and build what Bree wants? Those are big questions. The answers did not come up overnight. And in fact, I'm still building. But to me, that's the Untamed Mind, is this process that I'm going through. And I think the rest of my life's journey will be about unschooling myself of the things I thought were right for me because other people said they were, and really tuning into what's right for Bree and building that life.
Oh, it's like going through uncharted territory is what I'm hearing you say. The unlearning, the self-discovery without the ego. Who am I? Like, what do I actually want? So you mentioned therapy. What were some of those tools, modalities you used, whether it was like specific journaling prompts or just when you look back, what really helped you get to the real self?
Therapy was first and foremost, and that was more in the acute phase. I don't think and I was also put on medicine. And so that was just my experience. I'm no longer on that. But that was incredibly powerful. And but for those two things in my acute phase, it probably lasted about a year while I was trying to wrestle with and come to grips with this new normal that wasn't necessarily me having the same relationship to work, but not having a new one either. Those were most effective in the acute phase. And then it was more than 2 years ago, kind of it was like this build of and almost like James Clear talks about habit stacking.
Mm-hmm.
So the next thing that came in my evolution was I decided to reevaluate my relationship to alcohol. And that was incredibly powerful for me because when I stopped drinking, I began to realize a lot of the things that I thought were fun or said were fun weren't actually fun on a felt level. Being in noisy restaurants, parties, late night parties, staying up late. And I began to identify the countless ways on a daily basis that I was abandoning myself. So that was the next stage in my journey. And then from there, did breath work, became certified in breath work. And that has just been so impactful to help me to connect with myself. So it's not only about unbecoming. I think there's then that void, and nature doesn't like a void. So what do we fill back with it? And for me, that was what breath work did, is it filled that void from alcohol and really not being connected to myself. It brought me back in. I have a lot of intuitive downloads that come in when I do breath work. And that's just such a resetting practice. Anytime I feel dysregulated, it's either breath work or go for a walk. And so more time in nature, I think, is something else that I began to supplement over the past 2 years too.
Wow.
Let's talk about breath work, because I know a lot of people listening, and ourselves included, we've heard about it. We've heard different practices that people use. What does that specifically look like for you? Because I think that's really helpful when people, that's what people want is, okay, but how do you do it?
Yeah. So I'll talk about the practice that I'm certified in, but I think what's most interesting is probably the second piece, which is what does it actually look like in my daily, weekly life? So I'll talk both pieces. I'm certified in hypnobreathwork, and it is important for anybody who's not familiar with breathwork. There's a lot of different types, styles, brands, if you will. So the particular style I use is about 25-minute active breathwork session. If I'm leading a group, I'm going to book more like 60 minutes because there's time on the front end to explain what we're actually going to get into. Then we go through the 25-minute breath work, and then we really spend intentional time processing what may have come up in the breath work for everyone. Then it's set to music. So a little distinct in the type of breath work, the pattern I use is the holotropic breath work pattern. It's been called that for about 60 years, but breathwork as a practice has really been around for thousands of years. When you think of yoga, there's a breathing pattern that you engage in. That's a piece of the nervous system regulation and just the focus that comes in through yoga and other modalities. But I think it's becoming more mainstream to use it as a tool in the toolbox. And so it's set to music. We go through songs. I'm giving cues. I'm giving prompts while we're doing the inhale to the belly, inhale to the chest, and breathing it out. And the pace that I use when I'm facilitating a session is going to be very dependent on what are we trying to work through. If I've built a relationship with someone and say it's a one-on-one, that pace, we're going to move faster. There's going to be a lot of physical sensations that may come up, buzzing, tingling, sometimes headache, head pain here. If anything is bothering you in your body, it might come up through that faster pace. If we want a more restorative pace, we're going to take it a little bit easier. And usually that's where I start people, because everybody in the first few sessions of breathwork has this question in their head: am I doing this right? and it's, similar to meditation, which I guess is another practice that I use as well. I don't find it as useful to process things out of my body, but I find it incredibly effective just to pop an earbud in and find some peace in my day. So that's where breathwork is in terms of what I'm certified. How I use it, I'm not a daily breathwork person. I think a lot of people are. Meditation is a more daily practice for me right before bed. Breathwork is an every few days, and especially when I'm going through times of great stress, overwhelm, anxiety. If I feel stuck, if I'm not sure what the next step is, I'm going to lean on breathwork. And when I facilitate breathwork on myself, I'll usually just pop into Spotify. And because I use Spotify almost exclusively for leading breath work, it's got a lot of the music, and I'll put the DJ on and he'll lead me through a 5-song series, and I'm guiding myself through breath work. There is a wonderful app that the facilitator, it's called Mastery. And so there are apps. I know there's a lot of apps out there. That for me is a little more challenging sometimes to get my brain, because speaking of squirrel brain, it's like it wants to go other places. So my preferred practices are someone in person or via Zoom facilitating a breath work on me, or guiding myself through a breath work.
Oh, thanks for walking through that. I think it's so nice to know where people are going, what it looks like, how often you're doing it. I love when people tangibly talk through this.
I also think, though, it's important to just do it. And it takes experimenting and self-exploration to find what works for you. Like I was just on a podcast on Monday and she said, I can't fit in 30 minutes. How do you fit in 30 minutes? I'm like, who told you it has to be 30 minutes, right? It can be 5 minutes. It can be 3 deep breaths, but at least carving that time out to then explore, because I'm sure you just started dabbling with it and then it changed your life and you're like, I'm going to get certified. But it took being open to doing it.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. That's such a great point. It does not have to be any duration of time. So I lead a lot of workshops in corporate environments, and I don't ever lead with the fact that we're going to do a breath work. I lead with mindfulness, intentionality, nervous system regulation. I talk about those things. Some of the entry points I have is a breath work that maybe lasts 8 minutes. Maybe we're only doing it for one song so people can get comfortable, especially in a work setting where people are not always going to be open to trying new things. Being a beginner is hard in a lot of contexts, but we're more comfortable being a beginner in our personal life often than even at work. Or I'll even open a workshop with the box breathing, which is, in 2, 3, hold 2, 3, release 2, 3, hold 2, 3. And I'll go through a few series of that, especially when I have a group that I can sense is just not going to be open to it. They're very unfamiliar with things like yoga or meditation or any kind of nourishing practice. I'll start with something that's really palatable.
It's so funny to me that the answers to like truly healing are as simple as breath, and it's free. It's wild. But when I look at you, Bree, I think of this being kind of part of the culmination of how now you're doing this. But your life has been, you're on this trajectory, then you're unlearning, and now you're rebuilding. And I think it's so beautiful what you've done and this journey you're taking us on. But I think talking about the ugly parts are what people really need. You've changed, and when you stop drinking, what happens? And it is beautiful because like truly you get clarity on, and I love what you said about how when you take something out, your body wants to put something else in. So when I took out alcohol, I'm eating more sugar. I'm like doing these things that are like still self-sabotage. So I want to talk about when you're in the midst of this big change, you're unlearning, your circles are shifting, the time of day you're awake is changing, like everything is uprooted and relationships shift. And so I just want to talk about that, like what that experience has been like for you, whether it's with family or friends as you're changing and rebuilding this new Bree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a really important piece of the puzzle, and I'm not going to sanitize it. It's really brutal. And that's, brutal. And on the other side, like once you've gone through it and have sort of brought the logic brain back on track with the change that's happening in relationships, you can be like, okay, that chapter had to close so that I could keep on this path. But in the midst of it, it's really brutal. Even when we're talking about having this conversation, I've had people say you've changed and they don't mean it nice. Right. Mm-hmm. And there's a few ways I deal with that, but I really want to, even more recently, I left the law firm I co-founded and had several months of a lot of deep pain and grief. And the way I am as a feeler, I'm an empath. I don't come to anger. So even when people are reacting really strongly with anger, I just feel so hurt. Mm-hmm. And so I had a lot of months where I sat in really deep hurt about how people were reacting to my decision to leave the law firm. Significant pain. It felt like almost an injury. Thankfully, I did have better tools, but I'll be honest, it doesn't make it go away. And I think what was interesting about this last transition that I did last year was because I knew I was reaching for something that was going to feel more aligned. I didn't have the form and function of my new business that I was launching, but I just knew staying in the swill of the legal system was not helping workplaces to be better places for all people. That wasn't for me. So I knew on the other side of this, but I had thought the second I left the law firm at the end of August, it was going to be sunshine and rainbows. And to exactly what you said, instead, it felt like an avalanche of even more grief because there was this enormous loss and I had to give that space. And so for the entire month of September, it looked like a lot of ugly tears. It looked like enhanced therapy sessions just to process this grief. And I want to, a lot of my grief has been in the work settings. And I don't think that there is universal acknowledgement that that grief is as acceptable to like hold out that I'm really grieving this, because a lot of what I had mirrored back to me at several points in my life where I've had these deep work ruptures, I've had mirrored back, I thought you were stronger. Like, why are you still bothered by this, upset about this? Why is this coming up to you? And that was by people I love and care about, reflected that back to me. And so it's like a long journey that I've been on to unattach from others' opinions of what my felt experience is. That's not easy. And also holding space for those really deep feelings that have come up, because that it's just been a really tough part of this journey of unlearning and unbecoming. The other thing I want to say in terms of relationships is I had heard that when people become entrepreneurs or they make healthier life choices and more focused on well-being, that you're going to lose your friends. I did not think that I would be one of them, in particular with some of our really deep friendships that we've had. And, you know, isn't that the thing when you think it's not going to happen to you, it does. And that's a whole nother level, a lot of tears. There's a relationship in particular that for all intents and purposes, they are not communicating with us. They specifically said for the past 2 years, you've been different. And then I think, we moved 2 years ago. We stopped drinking 2 years ago. We prioritized our family and our kids more 2 years ago, you know, and so it just is. But I think a really important piece of this puzzle is making space for that grief. I think if I were to have been at a different place, shoved it down. I used to love, like back in, go 10 years back, I loved that I was a ruthless compartmentalizer. Like I could shove it all down. No one knew I was in pain. No one knew anything. I didn't even acknowledge it to myself. That stuff will come up. The body keeps score, right? On a physical level, on a mental and emotional level. So I've gotten better at sitting in the pain and the discomfort, and it feels like a dark night of the soul.
You're not doing it alone, which is awesome, because your husband and life partner, Josh, has also radically changed. I ran into Josh. I was like, whoa, you look different. He's lost weight. He seems so happy. He's like, his eye contact was more. He's just it was like a new person. He completely looked different. And following along on his journey, which we're going to have Josh on the podcast too, because he did something really cool. But I want to talk about your relationship, because you both are radically changing at the same time together. You're doing 75 hard together. You're shifting career paths together.
And that's not always the case. No. I feel like it's one partner's changing.
Yes.
And things are shifting because of that in the relationship.
Yes. Yeah. So let's talk about that, and just maybe, who started changing first, and how you kind of weave and bob and weave through this together with kids and professionally and in your relationship.
Yeah. So, and that's what I think is really important to mark, is Josh and I are now on what feels like parallel tracks of growth and evolution and just commitment to learning and becoming growth-oriented people at the same time now, but it wasn't like that. So if we go back 6 years ago, for example, there were probably 3 years where I was feeling like we were not aligned, where it was uneven commitment. And what was interesting about that time, I had this thought, I wanted so much for him. I wanted him to grow. I wanted changes within him. I wanted it all at the outside. And I'll be honest, that was probably the toughest year of our marriage in 15 years. We've been together 25 years. Probably the toughest year of our relationship was when I kept wanting things for him that I don't think he wanted for himself, or he wasn't ready for, and I was pushing. And so it was this push without any acknowledgement or me looking in the mirror and saying, I have a piece of this puzzle. And I was doing things that, I had resentment, or I had expectations of things he would do around the house because I was busy with work, or, just a lot of unspoken issues were coming up or bubbling up in ways that they haven't before. And I say that because I think what's worked so well for us now to get us in this place is I've come to radical acceptance of him as a human, because don't we all just want to be loved for just who we are, like flaws, imperfections, and all? And I had this, I don't know why it was such a big light bulb moment, but it was for me to say, that's what I want. Why am I wanting him to change so much and to strive almost on his behalf? Like it's not healthy. It's not helpful. you really just want to be loved right where you are. And so coming to that realization has made me a far better wife, a better partner, just someone who sees and loves him as he is instead of trying to change him. And maybe that's the recovering fixer in me. I hope that's relatable to others too. But once I did that, our relationship really grew and he found his own path. So for him, that's looked like becoming yoga certified, a real love of yoga and a deep passion around philosophy, just some really cool things for him. So they're not necessarily the specific things that I reach for. I have a really wild ambition and drive to make workplaces better. And that's this really big thing for me. And in the same way, I can recognize and see how the big things for him, philosophy, he loves yoga. He loves the real heart of yoga, not just like the physical exercise of yoga, the heart of yoga. He's deeply passionate about it. And I make more time to understand what he's interested in, what he's learning about. And that's the juice, I think, that has come from and allowed us now to be on this parallel track because it's a real deep interest and I'm making more space for it. But that had to come from me. That was nothing he did differently.
Yeah. I think something that I learned too with our coaching with Catherine is she convinced me and then showed me that one person can change a relationship. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we were like, well, they need to work on it too. And so it holds you back from doing work on yourself. And I love that. And I've experienced that with my own husband where it's like, if you want things to change, it has to come from a place of love and acceptance of, like you said, right where you're at. Like, how can I find more space, grace? What can I find in them that I love? Like, my greatest thing I love about Justin is when we're together, he just lets me be who I am. Like, he's never trying to change me. So it's like, why am I not giving him that same experience? Because it's so beautiful. And you can see it in your relationship. You guys do a lot together and you're really experimenting. So how's it been for him as a male shifting into this yogi and playing guitar and all the things I see him do? How's it been for him with his male friendships and family dynamic?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that, and I don't want to make a generalization. I don't know on a family level, they're incredible support. And yet there is this feeling not a lot of questions. And this is true, I guess I would say, more so for him than for me. But there is this unique thing that happens in your relationships when you're doing these, they feel bold, but reaching for new things. You're a beginner in many ways, whether that's a new business. People are hesitant to ask questions about how it's going. It's like they're worried. I don't know what it is, or guitar or yogi, or so it feels like there is a different energy coming from someone else. I think the support is there for sure with the family units, and yet they just don't know how to wrestle with this new life that we're building for ourselves, I think. And that it just is, I think, and we'll continue to feel into that, but that's definitely a piece where they're like, what the heck is going on? Not quite sure. My dad asked a beautiful question the other day. He said, so what is Josh doing exactly? I don't know how to ask him questions. And the way I approached, I love that he asked. I thought that was really a beautiful question. But it is this, our parents have this agreement about what work looks like, about what a partnership, a marriage looks like, and the roles that each are to play. And we are actively rejecting a lot of those agreements that they have from their own conditioning growing up. And so I love that he asked the question, because that then opened the door for me to share the cool things going on in Josh's life, while also kind of coaching or guiding to say our relationship and quote the roles or the habits, behaviors, the things that you see us doing are going to look different than the way you maybe structured your marriage.
How have you seen that shift within your relationship with your kids and your home life? Because both mom and dad are following their dreams and their passions. So I can only imagine how that's overflown to your house.
Mm-hmm. One of the things Brooke said to me, so I had stopped drinking. And that's another thing I just want to comment on is every little micro change that I've made, that I'll speak to my changes, have come with this other side where I thought it was going to be sunshine and rainbows, and it's not as good. And so the first 90 days of not drinking alcohol, I didn't really enjoy it. I felt lame. All these things. Anyway, Brooke says to me, and it was probably 60 days into not drinking, and I was just kind of in my feels. I was like, gray cloud, is this going to work? Do I want to do this? You have all the first of going into a liquor store, all the family functions, all these things. Anyway, he says to me, Mom, you're laughing more than you ever have. And gosh, that was incredibly powerful. And so there is more laughter in our home. There's more joy. There's still a lot of parenting is not easy. I still get, Mom, why are you working so much? You know, those kinds of things. But I do feel like it's helped all of our relationships. And by extension, the kids are better off because of the changes that we've implemented for sure. And how that will serve them in their life. They're at least seeing different models. Again, when I think about the models of family, spousal relationships, conflict, like how that played out, we're just a bit more intentional, a little bit more conscious in how we interact with one another and the time that we put into our relationship. And they're seeing that. And I hope that that creates some dividends for them as they go forward with their life.
Yeah. I keep thinking that you're normalizing an evolution. You're normalizing it in your families. They're probably like, what is happening with these guys? What are they doing? Right. And then your friends, it's happening with your friends. Like, you know, a lot of people, I'm sure you went to law school, are still in law, and that's like what they're doing and the path they're on. And they're like, what's going on over here? And then your kids are seeing it that, yeah, I remember when I was 8, Mom started a business and I watched her change. And all of a sudden we were laughing more by the lifestyle changes. You know, I think it's cool that our kids are going to see that you don't have to have one identity. You know, and I think that's what gets rejected by people sometimes. Like you mentioned, the friends that you're having difficulties with is like, they have to relearn a new person. And for them, that's like work and hard. And I want my friend that wants to get drunk with me, you know, and it's like, if they're a true friend, like we have to normalize that as we shift and evolve and change, like you're going to get a new version of me. And I hope you're open to something that's lighting me up. It doesn't matter what it is, if it's yoga or if it's law, like it's like, you know, it's that authenticity. And I think normalizing talking about this isn't lighting me up anymore. Do you get anxious when you drink? Because like I've been having that conversation. Like anybody else have heart palpitations every once in a while? Like I got to not drink for 75 days and see if I can get better, you know? And so I'm curious that conversation with people, like now, is it pretty normal for you to just openly say the things you're struggling with? Like I know you have podcasts, but personally with friendships or with family, like can you just explain kind of where you're at, or do you have boundaries around how you communicate with people or how you let them in?
Ooh, such a good question. I think I'm real comfortable on the work front, being vulnerable, saying, you know, as an entrepreneur, this is really hard. This is, you know, a challenge for me, and building a lot of connections that way. I think where my guardrails exist and this has always been true for me. It's just served me well to not speak badly about my relationship with Josh with other people. Now, there have been like micro moments with my mom, you know, where I'm like, oh, I'm having a really hard time with this. And yet I am on the whole very proud and happy and joyful in my relationship. And I try to prioritize that because I think there's this culture, and there's a lot of history for why women connect on that level, but I haven't really, that's just not somewhere that I feel like I want to be living in a lot, is in that griping and venting in that space. So I guess that's such a good question. I think that's where a guardrail has been for me. Parenting and business feels a lot safer to talk about the hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that. I think it's important to like figure out who's your support system in the midst of this. Like, what is okay to talk about? Mm-hmm. What's okay? Like for me, as I'm changing, you know, I think it just becomes so clear who's got your back or who's open to you changing. And it's so important because it's really lonely. And I'm curious, as you were talking, I was relating so much to with the parenting stuff and then people getting confused on what you're doing. I'm curious with Brooke, like for you, do you feel like people struggle asking you questions as you change or as you're starting business? Like, do your friends who are kind of getting into their professional fields, like, did they struggle asking you questions about business?
Yeah, I'd say it's a lot more. I get a lot more questions now than I used to of like, what are you, like, I think people are just confused to what you said, Bree, like, what the hell are you doing? And you're like, I don't know either. I'm figuring it out. Mm-hmm. But now you're more, I'm more confident in like, no, this is what I'm doing. And I think the more confident we become in this evolution, it almost gives people permission to ask, like, oh, she's serious about this. Okay, if I care about her, I want to make her know that I care and I'm going to ask. And there's certain people that do ask. There's certain friends that don't. But I think it shows you, just like not drinking shows you, it shows you who your people are, and it shows you what spaces feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious too, Bree, for like the person that's in the workplace, because you're going in workplaces and you're helping people have a better culture. How you help people, whether it's the business thrive better and have a better culture, or someone that's in a toxic work environment that was you, right? Or that was a version of you. What's your advice to them on like how to get off the hamster wheel, whether it's the business changing or like the person leaving? Like, what was kind of that final straw? How do you decide this is not for me or something really has to change here?
I think the first and foremost is normalizing the experience that the person is having. So I've done a lot of research. I was an employment lawyer, and one of the things, the phone would ring 10 to 15 times a day and people were experiencing harm. And so that hamster wheel, and some of these people would get into one job, 3 months later, we'd be hearing from them again in a new job. I'm back at it. The same thing has happened. Now there's some industries that are more prone to that, like a woman being in a manufacturing plant. That's a very common situation. And so first and foremost, it's just the recognition that they are experiencing something. And at least in the legal context, it's like, is it actually something that is actionable? Often, no. It's like, it's what you're talking about. The harm or the pain that they're experiencing in the workplace is more that toxic workplace. That's not actionable unless there's discrimination, they've made a protected report and they're being retaliated against, or there is sexual harassment happening. There's no claim to be had. And I just mentioned that because a lot of people, that's the thing they want to grab onto. And so then what is left for that individual to wrestle with is exactly what you're saying. Do I leave? Do I stay? Or do I go? And so much of that comes, the channels within an organization that somebody has, the levers they can pull are usually going to HR. And so there's another decision point that will come then if they report something to HR, or if they solicit help, feedback, guidance, coaching from HR, and there's no change. Well, then the question becomes to what degree, how much is it affecting your mental health? And is it sustainable for you as a human to continue to be in this? Are there other roles within the company, depending on the size of the company? And these are all very individual answers that only that person can answer. And that's what I do in private mentorship when I'm working with someone. We'll go through some of this. We'll spend a lot of time and a lot of space giving the person who maybe even hasn't wrestled with, how do I feel if I look forward in 1 year's time and I'm still in the same position? What comes up in my body? What does this mean for me? To answer that bigger question of, does it make sense for me to stay in this role? But we got to it's teasing it out, but only that person knows whether that's a yes or a no. And it's such this ROI, like what is the return on investment of staying? And does that make sense for them to stay in that role? As a broad brush, my personal philosophy is, if your job is causing you significant mental anguish, kind of like the definition of depression almost, and I just had a doctor repeat this back to me for a loved one. It was so helpful. Depression looks like consistent low mood. There's not really spikes of high mood. And so I love that analogy, because for a toxic workplace or the repercussions from work, if it is a consistent pain that you are experiencing day after day, there's not those bright moments where you really love your work. As a broad brush, I would say that's not worth it for most individuals. What we're learning about stress, and I think in our lifetime, workplace, just the stress, the overwhelm, the chronic nature of the inputs that we take in, the email, all of that, I think it's going to be viewed similar to cigarettes, because what we're seeing is the physical impacts. So many of the disease that is coming up is actually associated with the stress that we allow ourselves to be inundated with. And so I think we're going to start to see some standards come up, whether that's work-life balance standards or those types of things. And that's part of the work I'm doing with the Work Wound Institute, is partnering with organizations to do deeper research on this. So long answer to the question, but my broad brush is to say, if it's causing significant harm mentally, which usually looks like physically also, that's a time to seriously consider whether there's other jobs and it's time to get out of those environments.
I love that this is your work, because it's so needed, because so many things tie us to staying, the money that your family needs, the benefits, the investments you've made, the shares you have, like all of these things keep us tied to it. And I don't want any shame on people for staying, because that's a really tough decision to leave something where you financially, your family's dependent on it. And so I just want to acknowledge that this is something a lot of people are feeling, where they have harassment in their space, but they're like, you know what, but at least I have this, or I'll just try to ignore them or whatever. But at the same time, it's like, this is your one life and you're here 40 to 60 hours a week, or you're working from home and it's like tainting the brightness of your home because you hate the work you're doing in your office. Like, I just want to normalize that this is like, so many people are in this box, and the fact that you're here to shift it, to change it, to talk to the people that are providing these benefits is huge. And then also as a coach to people to help them decide what to do, like, what a beautiful space to be in that is so needed. That's amazing.
I want to know how you keep that work-life balance for yourself, because you're taking on some heavy work. You've got a mission. From what I know about you, you were very type A. You used to be a lawyer, still are, like, still have that ingrained in you. And so how do you find that balance now being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I've been telling myself a lot lately, like, you do this for work. So, and by that I mean, I think where the rubber meets the road is I do struggle with work-life balance because I absolutely love my work, and my schedule looks different. And so, for example, for this summer, the work-life balance that I have, I primarily do programs and I'm leading workshops and my private mentorship clients Tuesday, Wednesdays. And I had this vision that it was going to be Tuesday, Wednesdays, Monday, Thursday, Friday. I was going to be more present in the home. And that just wasn't working. There weren't enough hours in a Tuesday, Wednesday, even in the active programs I was leading. So I opened up Monday, but then I'm wrestling with the guilt of doing that because Monday was supposed to be our fun day. So I think the answer is, for me, I like the phrase work-life harmony. And it just lands better in my body to say, I'm looking for harmony. The justice scales are never going to balance for me. And how can I find harmony? More moments of being really present and intentional with my kids, while also Saturdays, I am often working for several hours because it brings me joy, and they're off playing, they're off reading, and I'm not present and intentional with them, but I'm finding pockets elsewhere. So I think a piece of the harmony comes from designing my week in a very non-traditional way, so that I can still do the evening kids activities, but I'm getting extra bonus time in different ways. And I have that benefit because Josh is also really flexible. And so we can ebb and flow in terms of parenting with the kids in a way that feels good to us. But I get a lot of non-traditional work time at non-work times. And that's what it's looking like for me. But I have to put that governor on and check in with myself on a regular basis, because if I had it my way, I'd be working a lot more. And so the governor for me comes up to say the kids are only young and they only want to be with you in real heavy doses for just a little bit longer. And maybe that sounds, I don't know, harsh, but that's the reality of kiddos who are almost 11 and 8. And I'm using that to calibrate the amount of time I put into the business.
Yeah. And when I was on your podcast, and Brooke and I were talking about this earlier too, where it's like, we have the guilt of working, but we're working and chasing our dreams for our kids. And so it's like, it's just heavy. There's no right answer. There's no right way to do it. And I love that word harmony and you and I talked about this on your podcast, where you were asking me how I make this work when the kids are like, spend more time with me. And it's like, it's honesty. It's honesty with yourself. It's honesty with them. I am doing this because of this. This is what, when I'm staring at this computer, this is what I'm doing. This is who I'm helping. This is for how much longer. And then you and I will do this. So we have something to look forward to. And I think that just helps me, where there's no like, what are they doing and why aren't they with me? You know, it's like it's very clear what we're doing, because we do have these heart-centered missions and we want to help people and we're on fire about it. And it's in the midst of parenting, which is, I think, going to be eventually really cool. But right now it's like everything's on fire for the most part. We're just doing our best. So I just want to send love to all the parents out there trying to figure out how to deal with the guilt, because you're always going to have it. Like, there is not enough time to spend with them. They are little ones, and that's heavy.
Yeah. There's also this thing, and I've had to get really honest with myself about where is the waste. So yes, and when I'm at my computer, is the impact usually high? Yeah, absolutely. But there's time on my phone when I look at how much time am I spending on social media. And speaking of ROI, there's not a lot of ROI, but I'm spending a lot of time. I'm saying it's work, but it's not. It's me scrolling. It's like taking away time. And so as much as I desire to be highly intentional with my time, I still have moments of waste. And so for me, that looked like in the past 2 weeks, actually hiring a VA who's going to go help me with social media, because I can recognize I just got to get off those apps, because that's where, if there's one amount of waste where it's not moving the business, it's not helping me, and I'm using it as like almost a coping mechanism, there's just dead time going into it. And I want to get rid of that so that I can up even more the harmony that the kids feel that I'm present with them.
Oh, I love that. Something I keep hearing too is like radical honesty. Honesty with yourself of, is this workplace serving me? Are these habits serving me? Is alcohol serving me? Honesty with your kids, like total honesty of, am I building the life that I'm proud of? And that feels, there is harmony in it. How does it feel in my body? How does it feel in my family? And that's not easy to do.
Yeah, there's a Montessori principle that I love. It's like 3 things to do this radical honesty and accountability. First, look at your environment. So this, like when we're talking about work-life balance or work-life harmony, how is my environment supporting the goals that I have? And so for me, that was like the environment of my phone, because I tell myself I'm working, is not serving that. Then the second inquiry is to self. And often we like to point to others and, kind of like we talked about earlier in relationship, pointing to self. They are not doing something. It's, that issue, but it's that first or the second step is you got to look at yourself. And that's what I've become really comfortable doing. And it's not, there's a difference. I think I want to point out for anyone listening, it's not that inner critic. Her name is Rhonda. She's real mean. It's not Rhonda. It's that kind of loving kindness voice in myself to say, I'm actually spending a lot of time that is wasted on my phone. This isn't helpful for my family. It's getting in the way of my values and what I really want for myself. So I got to find, again, going back then to environment, a different environment. And for me, that looked like outsourcing some of that. And then the third, then you can look to others, but it's these first 2 that are so impactful, starting there rather than making it about someone else. My kids are just too needy. They don't understand what I'm doing, right? I could easily go to the third one, but that's not helpful for our relationship.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I'm so happy that we have you on the podcast, because I feel like we need an example of someone in real time who has made the radical shifts. That is somehow, not that you don't care what other people think, but you're doing it anyway. And so I feel like following you and listening to your podcast, especially right now, because you're not totally in the beginning stages, but kind of building your business and learning so much. And so I want everybody to know where to find you, how to follow you, where your podcast is. Give everybody all the details, and we'll link everything in the show notes.
Beautiful. Yeah, the place where I'm most open and honest would be on Instagram, Bree Johnson Official. And while I am outsourcing some of it, I'll still be present on there talking about things. And then my podcast is really going to be the best place. You're going to hear my voice. I do solo episodes regularly. I talk about things related to the workplace, time blocking, time management strategies, leadership approaches. But then I also get real about, what does it mean to be a wife? What does it mean to be a mom? What is untaming in the space of being a business leader and trying to make an impact in times of uncertainty? All the things, really nothing's off the table. So podcast, The Untamed Mind, it's on all the major streaming platforms. You can find me there. And that's really a source of joy for me. So you'll hear a lot of good stuff. I do have a website as well. My business is Executive Unschool. So the URL is the same, Executive Unschool. You can find me there as well.
Such important work. So grateful to be connected with you, and honestly to have you as a role model. I'm beyond grateful. So thank you for being you and the work you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to connect with you both.
Yeah. Yes. And as you know, we always end with a few segments. Our first is your 3 gold stars. Would you share yours, please?
Oh. Okay. So first gold star, I handled a similar situation in a very different way. And so when I have the same or similar conflict come up, what I've been marking more now is how I handled it differently. And that how has been really important. So I have a how. I have a speaking opportunity that is something that I just dreamed about coming up that I can't quite share. But if you follow me on social media, you'll see that coming up. I don't know. It's a lot and so amazing.
Exciting.
Yes. And I'm getting more comfortable from an identity perspective, sinking into being a wife and a mom. And I know I've had kids for a long time. I've been a partner for a long time, but finding joy in those labels and in that piece and not leading with, I am a business owner and really having that ambition lead. I'm really getting comfortable in those spaces.
Very
Love
cool.
that. Next segment is Unleashing Ivy. Surprise questions, even though this has all been kind of surprise. My question is around the radical shifts you made, alcohol being one. What would you say another one is and how it's impacted you?
Being okay with being misunderstood. That's been hard. I don't like it. I like to people please. I'm the oldest child of divorced parents, of being into environments. This is at a family level. This is at a friendship level. This is at thousands of people who knew me as law firm Bree. And I have shed that identity and just thinking that people are misunderstanding me. And they've spoken that. They've said, harsh things about me and being okay that some people are never going to understand.
What do you tell yourself when you're struggling with that? Like, what do you say that's like, do you have like a mantra or something like in the moment that really helps you?
I go back to my values is usually so when I've made a lot of decisions that are in service of my integrity, and I just go back to that core that, and like for me in a felt sense, it comes in right here. So I don't have a mantra necessarily, but I go back to the core. It was the decision, for example, to leave the law firm. Was that in integrity with myself or was that out of integrity? It was in integrity. So whatever they say, however they perceive me, whatever nonsense is coming up, just setting that aside.
I love it. All right. My question is moving forward and kind of in real time right now, whether it's personally or professionally, what's something like this is the next thing I really want to tackle and feel confident in that's like, it feels uncomfortable, but I know it's like my next mission to either step into or kind of own.
I'm writing a book.
Ooh. Let's talk about it. Whatever you want to share.
Yeah. I'm working on my book proposal right now. And when I was really little, I sought a lot of comfort and really friendship with books. So if I had one goal for my life when I was 5, when I was 10, when I was 15, I wanted to be a published author. And then I set that aside, thought that was not, what achievement is that? Anyway, so I'm back to that. I'm going through a program, working on my book proposal. And so for me, the big piece is getting comfortable with rejection, because I know while I can manifest and hope for my book to be picked up right away, the reality is I'm going to hear a lot of no's. And so I think the actual next big thing for me is to get comfortable in that rejection, but embedded in that is writing this book. It's going to be based on my signature program in Executive Unschool and this process I take people through of building awareness, connecting to some of the self-sabotage habits that we have before you can think about expanding and stepping into that new identity. I'm so excited to be writing it. And so hopefully there'll be more coming, but I'm in very early stages of that right now.
Oh my gosh.
Huge.
Wow,
Congratulations.
That's amazing.
Oh, I'm so excited to see how this unfolds.
Another thing to follow along and see what you're doing and when it's going to be out. Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Okay, last question, Bree. If you could go back and tell younger Bree one thing, what age would you choose and what would you tell her?
I love this question. Thought about it a lot. I would tell the 5-year-old me who feels a lot of fear, but doesn't feel like it's safe to voice it. And so instead found a path of achievement, that I am loved just for who I am. That it isn't tied to my productivity, it isn't tied to what I achieve in the world, that I'm loved for just who I am. And others love me just for who I am. And I forgot about that for a really long time in my life.
Man, that's beautiful. And that's what matters, right? Like you've had the achievements, you've had the accolades, you've gotten the big income bumps, right? And I feel like everyone gets there and then they're empty because it's not something it's who you are. And it's that self-worth, and it's like feeling genuinely fulfilled in what you're doing. And it's so much about service and authenticity, and you're living it. And I'm so happy that you're where you're at, watching this journey with you. It's been so beautiful. And Brooke and I are really excited that you're part of our platform and that you're an example for others, whether they're moms or not. Anybody, they could be in their 60s and still be in corporate America and be like, you know what? I can change, I can evolve, I can shift. And so you're giving people that freedom and a path. I'm so happy you're writing a book. So thank you so much for your time, Bree. We are so excited to share you with our audience. And we always leave our listeners with a piece of gold, a quote that speaks to you.
It's something to the effect of, people may forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So powerful. Maya Angelou, she has so many beautiful quotes, but that's the one that sits on my soul. It's about how you make people feel.
This is Gold Ivy signing off.
Listen to your truth and go chase your gold. Oh, I love that.